Testimony Sunday. Now, in case you didn't realize, there's like two testimonies, two different types of testimonies. I call it little T testimonies, that when something cool happens on your job. Dan had a cool testimony this morning about sharing Jesus with somebody at work. That's his testimony. We might have a similar testimony, but he has that testimony. But the capital T testimonies, all believers have. That you came to Jesus, that he showed you your need for him, that you were a sinner in need of his grace and mercy, so you responded to him in faith, and he's made his way real to you. We all have that testimony. That's the capital T testimony that we all should be practicing and have on the edge of our seat, so that when there's an opportunity, we're ready to share our capital T testimony. But other testimonies are great too. The Lord provided, the Lord healed, all those testimonies are cool. So what we're going to do here this morning is a handful of Liberty Remnant Church folks went to, I guess, a class or a group with Pastor Van and Livingstone Church, and it was really powerful. And so we've got 2 or 3 of those testimonies, and then we'll transition, and we have a couple of capital T testimonies about how people came to know the Lord. And the idea is we want to be able to share these. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But first, would you welcome our first speaker, Debbie Hunt. We love Debbie. She's an awesome girl.
I don't know how awesome, but God is awesome. Okay. Got this one? Yep. Okay. I've been a Christian for 48 years. I got saved when I was 16, or just the day before I was 16. So it's very easy to remember. And I've lived for the Lord those years. I've had my dry spells. I've had my trauma. And so when I went into this class, I was thinking that it was basically for helping others. Because I've been a Christian 48 years. I know how to forgive. I know how to turn those things over to God and not become bitter. Seeking the Lord and living for him, and that nothing else mattered. But I was being drawn into helping people that are having issues with addiction or health issues. And Jay and Jamie said, well, this might be something that God can use to help you with it. And when I first went there, I was like, yeah, I'm way past this. I'm not trying to be boastful or proud, but it was just like, yeah, okay, I've got this. Stop thinking that. Every time the Holy Spirit kept telling me, stop thinking like that. Learn what I'm trying to teach you. And so I kept humbling myself and saying, be quiet. Because I thought I had the answers. And it was, I don't know if it was halfway through. It seemed like it was at the beginning, but I know it wasn't. Pastor Van brought up fear. And I'm like, I don't have a problem with fear. I'm not afraid. I know who God is. And in the following week or two, God just said, your heart is full of fear. It's full of fear. And he dug out what was hindering that joy and that abundance of knowing that my God rules and my God has the victory. And so I humbled myself and I go dig it out that fear, because I don't want to be afraid. And I don't think anybody who knows me would say that that's who I was. But everything I did was based on the fear of rejection. The fear of rejection from God. Even though I left him and I know he loves me, I still had that fear of rejection. And he just pulled it out. And then he showed me that it was even in how I responded to everybody. I can't be wrong. I have to make sure that what I say is right. I have to dig in, and I procrastinate to proclaim because I don't want to be wrong. And so in that class, it's greatly healed that fear of rejection. And I know we probably all have it. We just don't acknowledge it. And as a Christian for 48 years, I didn't know I had it. I really didn't. I would have told you, nope, I'm not afraid. God's got me. I know where I'm going, you know. But it wasn't really a fear of death or a fear of the unknown. It was a fear of the rejection. And God's just really shown me that he has me, I'm his, and that I don't have to be afraid of rejection, whether it's from him or anyone else, that he has me and I am his child. So that was the big learning of that class, and it was incredible. It was incredible.
I have notes too, probably won't use them. I've been a Christian probably for 6 months now. So this is like my big T kind of tied into this. Thank you very much. Well, I've been a fake Christian for longer. I don't know if you guys care about that. Longer than 6 months. Actually, being a fake Christian is what led me to seeking out having a real relationship with God. And when Pastor Jay brought up this Bible study, Free to Live Like Jesus, I thought, well, that's what church people do, so maybe I should do it. Signed me and my husband up. It's like $10 for the book. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to expect out of it or what it was. I just thought, we'll just start down this road, and little did I know that it would just open up this, I don't know, like a wormhole that I went down with things that I didn't even know I needed to address. But just the first few chapters of the book that we went through really is what led me to finding freedom in Christ. It talks about false guidance, deception, and bitterness and forgiveness. So I had to face, I was baptized 4 weeks ago, and I said a little bit of my testimony. I grew up in a really abusive home, and going through these chapters, I learned that in order to rebuke Satan, because Satan is a liar, we have to address those lies that he told us, and we have to specifically rebuke those. So I started to address those lies. When I was a little girl, my mother would wake me up 5 years old to tell me, she wished that she aborted me, or that she hated us because we were so dependent on her, and she was a single mom and it was so hard for her. But in addressing that lie, I also got to see the war that was going on, that God was fighting for me. I didn't recognize it then, but I recognize it now, because a man showed up to our house one day. I was probably 5 years old, and invited us to church, and my mom was like, take my kids, go ahead. And for 14 years, this man followed us wherever we went, and he was the warrior that God had fighting for us. And I didn't know it then until now. Recently, I was living the lies at home. I don't want you. I wish I would have aborted you. I'll give you guys a little insider secret to minorities who grew up poor, and we live in a world where you hear a lot about systemic racism and stuff like that. But what most people don't know is that it's our parents that are telling us that white people hate us. That was something that my mom, it was so weird because my mom hated the church that she sent us to. And most of the people there were white, and she would tell us, these people hate you. They hate Mexican kids. But God made her keep sending us there. For 14 years, she hated when the church showed up to bring us food for Thanksgiving or bring us gifts for Christmas. She hated them for it. But yet, every Sunday and every Wednesday, she was pushing us out the door to these people. And I got to see how to live like Jesus. I did use that time, though, to just bask in watching people be kind to each other, love each other, watching parents with their children. And I wish I would have had that opportunity to rest and really listen to the stories and the lies, though, that Satan uses, like a mother or father, to tell their children. It really starts to stick with you, and at one point you have to make that decision to face those lies. I didn't do that, so I spent 23 years just kind of rejecting God, rejecting the message that I heard, because I start to let those lies win that my mom told me, and I just didn't find myself to be worthy of God's love or his message. And during this Bible study, even Deb gave me some advice, and listening to Bob and Pat speak as well, and Pastor Van would talk about rejecting those lies, rebuking, because that's Satan just working in you to keep you away from God. And I got to address forgiveness as well. Most people would think that I would have had a hard time forgiving my mother or even the people that she had in our lives, but it wasn't so. I had believed so much her lies that I wasn't worthy, that forgiveness actually came easy to me. It's you could do whatever you wanted to me and I'd forgive you. I'd find a way to justify your bad behavior, and I would let you in my life, and you could hurt me again, hurt my family, hurt my children, hurt my spirit, because I felt that I deserved that. So I learned in this Bible study that I am the daughter of a king, and I don't deserve to be treated that way. So it actually gave me a backbone, but it also taught me I needed to forgive myself. I really hated myself. I learned from being a child to hate myself. I didn't look at the outside world. I just really hated myself. And I recognized I would drive around all day and think of all the reasons that none of God's promises applied to me. I was a sinner. I did wrong things. I got pregnant at a young age. All the things that I didn't do, I was always judging myself and saying, this is why none of God's promises are for me. So this Bible study really helped me learn to forgive myself, because I didn't know at the time that it was me that I hated the most out of everybody. But it's an ongoing process, and I'm just so thankful to you guys, and I'm thankful for that Bible study, which I think I'll probably have to do 20 more times before I finally get it, because there are days that I wake up and I fall back into believing those lies, and so pray for me, please, too.
Wow, I've heard parts of her testimony 3 times now, and still tear up. When I get to heaven, I want to meet this guy that brought you to church all these times, Marissa. I'm going to say thank you so much because of his seed. Think about that. It's seed. One day, he's like, well, I should go invite the family to those little girls to church and offer to take them. And he did. He planted that seed. I probably just seemed insignificant at the time, but look at the fruit it's producing today. And he still followed you around. Wow. So don't despise the day of small beginnings, Zechariah tells us. And that's an example of kind of what happened in your life, Marissa, and what's happening today. What should happen every day. We're always sowing seeds. Well, you heard a little bit. Pat's going to come and share a little bit more. But you heard a little bit about the power of a small group. So during the government shutdown of COVID, this verse that kept coming up was, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, and all the more while you see the day approaching. And it's like, hey, we have to assemble. The Bible tells us it's part of our faith, and oppose the tyrannical shutdowns that way. But there's so many people call themselves believers who aren't connected to a church. And if you're watching online, get connected to a church. We'd love to have you here, but be somewhere. be involved in a church. And so Sunday mornings are sacred, and I love Sunday mornings. But this verse that says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, and all the more while you see the day approaching. So Sunday service isn't all the more. That's like the bare minimum, Sunday morning. Really want to get as many people involved in a small group. So Marissa said, well, I'm no longer a fake Christian, so I guess I better go to Bible study because that's what non-fake Christians do. And then look what God did. So we really want to have home groups, small groups, life groups happening for that type of stuff. It's not what's happening on Sunday mornings is awesome, but it's a total different dimension of what might happen on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night. So Tim's got some sign-up sheets. Could you put them down by Tom's card so everybody can sign up if you're all interested in participating? Of course, we're looking for people to lead, looking for people to host, but we want this fall to be life-changing. And the next step, here we're planting a seed on this property, and then we're going to plant seeds by having small groups, because we are the house of God wherever we go, whether it's in somebody's house, whether it's in a park, whether it's in a dump, whether it's in a future permanent home, which we believe is here. And this includes young adults. We like to have a young adult small group. Yeah. And it could be anything. You're going to go shooting on a regular basis. That could be a small group. You go shooting and then you talk about what Jesus is doing in your life. You want to have a fantasy football team. You have a fantasy football team, and then you talk about what Jesus did. I don't care. I just want people to get together in homes and be real. And you're not just going to really get to know somebody when you come to church and see the back of their head and then leave. And we have to do barbecues once a month in the summer to get relationship happening. But we are a simple, relational, biblical church. So we're gonna do small groups. I'd like Pat to come on up. Patrick Thompson is a good friend of mine, and he went to the class as well. He's going to share about that, but I also wanted to share his testimony. He's got quite a testimony. And the radio door is blown open a lot because of what Patrick has done. Tim and Monica suggested something, doing that on the radio. That led to me being on the radio on 2 different stations and interviewed in 4 different programs, having my own program, outreach ministry of Liberty Remnant Church. But the guy behind the scenes making it all happen has been Patrick, and I've not given him the attention that he deserves, because he is a phenomenal warrior in Christ, even though he's kind of a baby Christian. I want you all to welcome Patrick Thompson, who's engaged to be married next week at this time.
Okay, I'm going to use my notes. Not a lot. I don't speak in front of people. So, I didn't want to start at the beginning, but I feel it's necessary to give the full context of my relationship and interactions with God. After all, He's the reason we're all here, right? Yeah, this is pretty uncomfortable for me. Thanks. So my mother met my father at a USO dance in Tacoma in 1966. He passed through an abbreviated boot camp at Fort Lewis on his way to Vietnam. When he returned in 68, they dated and were married. I was born in 1969 on Easter. They moved to Milwaukee, where my dad's family was, and before I was a year old, my mom was being abused by him. She hopped a train and headed home with me. Kind of a middle of the night thing, too, from what I hear. When I was 2, she met my stepdad, a stocky guy, 5'10", 240 pounds, that bragged about taking weightlifting classes 3 periods a day in high school. They dated for about 30 days and were married. I had an aunt tell me years later that she babysat me in those 30 days, and I was covered with bruises. I wanted this to be a lot happier than it is, but when I was 4, he adopted me, and my biological father was out of the picture. Major changes happened that year. The adoption, we moved to Parkland, where I was now in a neighborhood with other kids, and I got a little sister. From about 4 to 6 years old, I remember being beaten mostly with a belt, but my mother would come into the room, ask him to stop, and he'd tell her to get out of the room. And she did. But the worst part was the mental torture. Dad would make me pack my child-sized suitcase because a really mean family was coming to adopt me, and even the kids would beat me with belts. By about the third time he used this story, I knew it wasn't true, and I'm about 4 years old then, 5 years old. I endured long periods of torture and beatings. He would make me kneel in front of him as he grilled me and hit me in the face at random, sometimes bloody in my mouth, burn my arms and chest with cigars and cigarettes, or pop the blisters of previous burns while poking them with a toothpick, one of his favorite techniques. It wasn't always bad. My parents were in their 20s and would go out quite a bit and sleep until the early afternoon on weekends. Kids next door taught me how to catch the Sunday school bus. And about 4 or 5 years old, I could get my fill of cupcakes and Kool-Aid and be home before they woke up. I would love to be able to see how I dressed myself back then. In this time, I learned that God was someone to ask for help. I would pray that my dad wouldn't make it home from work. He delivered furniture, and I would pray to have something really heavy fall on him or have an accident on the freeway, but he always made it home. First time I ran away from home, I was 7. Also, the first time I got caught with a pot. I wrote a note saying I was sorry for being so much trouble for the family, so it was best I left. I remember it was getting dark as I watched my dad pull into the driveway that night after work as I was hiding behind a tree about a block away. 7 years old. I wasn't going anywhere. He knew that. I went home that night after giving him enough time to read the note. In the next 7 years, I'd run away 13 more times, staying away for a week or two by the time I was 11 or 12. I decided if no one else was going to help me, I was going to make him stop. Dad was a do-it-yourselfer and a car guy, so we were always working on something. I would be standing behind him holding a hammer and contemplate the best spot to hit him. Being the toughest guy I knew, my fear was that I couldn't hit him hard enough. There were times that he was under a car on a jack, and I'd envision letting it down. By this time, I had 2 little sisters and thought my mother was the only one that loved me. She asked me at about 12 if I wanted her to leave my dad, and I asked her who would take care of her and my sisters. That was the last mention of ever helping my situation. I wasn't just a bad kid. Most of the fighting I did in the neighborhood was to defend my loud, obnoxious sister, who got picked on a lot because of her weight. And fighting at school was mostly in defense of other kids being bullied. I always have a problem with tyrants and injustice. In 5th grade, I was expelled from public school for beating a bully and destroying his bicycle, which landed me in a Lutheran school from 5th to 8th grade. I tried to get help through the church, but my dad was crafty, and I was always the problem child. I thought if I could laugh at him when he was hitting me and make him stop. Not sure my rationale there. I sucked it up and laughed at him, and he finished with an epic bloody beating. That didn't discourage me, though. By 12 or 13, I had a reputation in the neighborhood as a fighter. 2 or 3 kids couldn't hurt me near as much as I got nightly at home. So over a period of couple of years, I stopped crying altogether and was able to smile at him when he hit me. This did have effect. From about 12 to 14, he thought twice about and really kept his hands to himself. At about 14, I think he forgot my tenacity and he had me pinned to the ground, pinned to the floor, hitting me in the face, punching my chest, but I was giving it all I had. There wouldn't be any more submission. He spit on me, I spit on him. I swung as hard as I could, and he wasn't going to make me stop. That night, I packed a backpack and was gone with my dirt bike. This time, I was done hiding. I went to a friend's house a few blocks away. A month or 2 later, I had a job at a miniature golf course and returned home. The transition back to public school wasn't an easy one after the Lutheran school. I went to 5 different junior highs and high schools over the next 3 years. Never finished in 10th grade. The last school was an alternative school that had a new drug program. They were forcing kids to take drug evaluation tests for minor reasons. And if they refused, they were expelled. After they took 3 or 4 friends from us, I organized a strike, and 4 buildings of kids walked out into the middle of the street one morning. And we threatened them with the media, but of course they talked us down, and we returned to school. And the next week I got tagged for drug evaluation, so I just crumpled up the paper. I had a full-time job by then. I crumpled up the paper and threw it in their face. It's caused other problems at home, and now I was couch surfing. My dad told me he would sign for me to join the military, and I told him he was nuts. After about 6 months of couches, I was ready to join. With no diploma, my options were Army or Navy. I went to a Navy recruiter at 17. They were kind of hum-ho about it. I was 17. And until I took the ASVAB test, I scored pretty well and got to go to any school I wanted to. So I chose jet engine mechanics. That was great for about 3 years until I had an altercation and eventually landed me in the brig for 6 months before I got out. Immediately out of the military, I married and had 2 kids. Of course, given my experience in history, this wasn't going to end well, and it didn't. She was from a tight Mormon family, and once we split, their efforts went into removing me from my kids' lives. I made it easy, of course, and I had no coping skills and anger problems, self-destruct mode like no other. My fallback has always been drugs, and this time losing my kids, I really didn't care about anything. Over the next 6-7 years, I got 9 felonies, 24 failure to appears on over 30 warrants. I robbed people, I stole cars, I dealt drugs, I made drugs, escorted prostitutes to work, drove getaway for countless crimes, was reported in newspapers that I was clocked at over 150 miles an hour, but the speedometer was buried at 160 for quite a while. I wouldn't say I had a death wish, but I didn't have a life wish. I didn't care. I did 20 months in prison after all that. But looking back and at my tattoos, I did care. I was searching for God the entire time. I felt abandoned by God, if he existed. I'd prayed as a tormented child for relief and found none. If God existed, I must not be one of his people, is what I thought. I looked at paganism and other ancient religions, Taoism, Kabbalah. I lived next to the Nisqually River and reservation and had a few friends from local tribes that I sold drugs to. Early one morning, I was at the river and found an eagle feather. As I'm walking, holding on to it, an old man in a pickup driving along the riverbank there stops and asks what it is. I tell him I found it, and he blessed me and it right there. I recognize this now as witchcraft, but for a young guy looking for a purpose, it was pretty profound at the time. I came to Spokane 22 years ago as part of the prison programming is work release. And if you qualify, you can spend the last 6 months of your sentence in work release. It had been years since I talked to my family and nowhere to release to, so I applied. Tacoma, Seattle, and Olympia are all constantly full. And the only place I could get a full 6 months was Spokane, which was great because I didn't know anyone here. I got a good job working in an industrial steel shop. I picked up the welding in the Navy and had other welding experience. I was able to save a few $1,000s in a couple months and was going to be okay when I got out. I had 30 days left and was looking for apartments, but then I got in the way again. I made a bad decision, got sent back to prison for and lost 90 days of good time. Now, mind you, I had 30 days left, a month, and I was going to be out. So with 4 more months on my sentence, I found myself at Airway Heights in medium security, which we have realized now was the same period of time Pastor Jay was a guard at medium security at Airway Heights. I met another I didn't meet him then, though. We didn't recognize each other. I met another important person in my life at that time, my wife-to-be. Julie was a guard at Brownstone Work Release and was more than likely the first person I saw when I got off the bus from prison. I didn't like it at the time, but I really appreciate that I got sent back. I obviously wasn't taking it seriously enough and had to rethink my thought process. When released, I reported to probation, never had a violation, and completed probation in record time, about a year. And I had been on probation for almost 10 years before that and never once reported, so that was a big deal to me. There's another person I met here right after I got out, Tim Ben. If you don't know him, come to our wedding next week. He'll be here. Tim and Shannon were great friends. I even lived with them for a few months. Tim's mom took me to church one night 20-some years ago, and I recently found out that it was Covenant Church she took me to with Pastor Danny back then, yeah. I left Spokane to return to Tacoma after a couple years to start a career with... This part's a little better. So it's getting better now, so maybe I'm a little more comfortable. To start a career with Midas. I was making decent money, paid my bills, stayed off drugs, was actually thriving. Midas would move me, all expenses paid, to fix stores that were underperforming. Lakewood, Tacoma, Wenatchee, Auburn, Federal Way. I was a Midas rock star. I had reconciled with my family, but not my children. I remarried. But that was destined to fail also. I hadn't addressed my anger issues. I knew I was angry, but given my experience, I figured I had a reason to be angry. And so right in the heyday, the best life an ex-con could imagine, my legs quit working right. I got checked for a brain tumor and MS, didn't find either, so I kept working and ignored it for a couple years, which allowed a bone spur to dig into my brainstem and scar, causing nerve damage. I chalked it up to karma for all the people I kicked in the face. I loved those old Billy Jack movies, if you know who Billy Jack is. The opportunity to move back to Spokane came about 12 years ago when a district manager I had asked me to move with him to open a shop with the potential to own my own shop. If you ever commuted in Seattle, you'll understand why I jumped on the chance. I had kept in touch with Tim and Shannon over the years, let them know I was coming back and would need a best friend when I got here. I was here about a year and found Julie on social media. We had been pretty close while I was at work release and had great conversations. Our spiritual views were about the same. We both saw the supernatural world around us and looked towards paganism for answers and, all the other things I talked about. In October, we've been together for 11 years now. Tim and I would have great philosophical conversations. He was running for office and solving the world's problems, and I was really good at pointing them out. We occasionally would bring God into the conversation, and I would be sure to tell him that I obviously wasn't one of God's people, that we had had a deal. He'd stay out of my house, and I'd stay out of his. And today I pray all the time that he just come and spend as much time at my house as he can. By this time, I was on disability and had all kinds of time on my hands. I found a guy on social media, Gavin Syme from the Soap Lake area. I don't know if Gavin Syme, he did these videos. He'd film police every time he saw them harassing people. He knew all the police there, but would also venture other places and film them. The police all knew him, and he would shout parts of the Constitution at them all the time. That hit a spot in me. So many of the times I was arrested or even searched, it was harassment. Although they were right, I was the criminal element. I felt they didn't have a right to harass me, and I would tell them and only get laughed at. In Gavin's videos, he'd point people to Chris Ann Hall and her videos. She's a constitutional lawyer, as if there is such a thing, and her husband is a pastor. She has a great set of video teachings, and it's all free. About the time I'm deep in learning for Chris Ann Hall, a guy named Ammon Bundy is holding a rally in Oregon for some ranchers that were targeted and wrongly imprisoned. As I learned more and started researching, I found the government had basically subverted the Constitution, changed all the rules, and we live in a society based on a set of laws they only use as talking points when convenient to their cause. When I say they and their, I mean politicians, not Democrats or Republicans, but in the Greek, all. So this had me angry at politicians and the government on a federal level. I was constantly being urged by Tim to forget about federal stuff. It's too far gone, he'd say, and look at local issues because this is where we all can make a change. As I started looking at local issues, I start digging into these people that are involved and find devout communists and socialists right here in Spokane. Local politicians, nonprofits, legal centers, all working to usurp, there we go, our constitutional government. And I found private meetings, meeting places, members, all calling themselves socialists. We often call them liberals, while they smirk, knowing it's much deeper than that. So needless to say, I was a bit freaked out. I asked a buddy who has a radio show if he wanted to report on anything I found, and he wasn't interested. It's not really their thing, but he told me who to contact. So through a couple other people, he put me in touch with Caleb, who worked for JBS at the time. The day we met, he invited me to a JBS meeting that night, once again at Covenant Church. That building's a special place for me. And that was about 3 years ago. When I pulled into the parking lot, a nice lady asked me if I was there for a prayer meeting. I said to her, "Oh, don't tell me I got duped into a prayer meeting." We both laughed, and I told her why I was there. The next weekend, a Sunday morning, I was listening to Church and State. I hadn't known about their show, and so I was catching up. Now, I have to say, God was working in my life already. I had a Day of the Dead mask that I had gotten in Mexico, and one day I just walked past it, took it off my wall, and threw it in the garbage can. And, yeah, so that had been going on. I would hear different things throughout my day, and it would make me stop and take a moral inventory. It's hard to explain, but God was really working on me. So here I am listening to the show, drinking my coffee on the back porch. I thought to myself, I think God might be putting people in my life. And instantly tears started flowing. It just took a maybe, just a maybe. Tears started flowing. I came into the house. Julie's right there and sees me crying. And I told her the same thing. And now by this time I'm sobbing. And I said, you know me, I'm not looking for this. We weren't really in a bad place in our lives. We're, both of us may be a little angry, but me more so than anybody. And but other than that, everything was pretty much just fine. I wasn't looking for this. I think I should talk to someone, and she agreed. I went off by myself and said, God, if it was always going to be this way, why? I was thinking it could have been so much easier than this earlier in life. And I got halfway through why, and he showed me in an instant that everything was for me and not to me my entire life. He showed me that he was there the entire time, and all these things happened for me, not to me. He showed me my new heart in that same instant and overwhelmed me with the love I've never felt before. That made me cry for 2 weeks or more every time I thought about it or tried to talk about it. I was apprehensive about going to Covenant because Tim had told me that was an activist church, and I didn't want anything to do with politics anymore. God just showed me himself that he was actually real, and that's all I could say for the first week through tears and sobbing. God is real, just like a 4-year-old little girl we heard about a few weeks ago. It took a few months, but I did come to terms with God and politics. What God said to me in that first moment through the slideshow of my life was that it was all for my armor, that I was to recognize the wiles of the powers and principalities that are not of this world, that I was to fight this spiritual battle, and that he raised me to be a fighter for a reason. This, of course, brought on a new set of challenges. I had a 50-plus-year-old chip on my shoulder, and I thought I was supposed to keep it. I knew that where most of our local Antifa worked, lived, I knew what they were planning, I knew where they talked about it. I was learning to be a better person, but 51 years anger doesn't subside easily. And I thought I was supposed to use it, not as if going out and doing something, but to be the angry one to knock somebody out when they came running, rushing the stage or what have you to disrupt. Nobody told me I was a disabled old man. I was going to church and learning, but I really wasn't happy with the way things were going. I would get angry and leave in the middle of a service sometimes before a sermon. Some was the internal struggle, is that really what God said, type of argument. But most was because I was hanging on to anger. I wanted to deal with my anger, but at the church I was attending, their solution would have been to send me to the school of supernatural deliverance, to be dipped in oil while 6 people screamed at the demons to come out. I thank God for leading me away from that church and into this one. My first meeting outside of the church with Pastor Jay, I realized everything I was talking about were angry stories. I quickly asked him if he offered any type of deliverance class in a joking manner. It's really amazing to see how God works. He told me his friend at another church, also a pastor, had a class and assured me they would not dip me in oil. Pastor Van Breeden teaches a course on a book written by Neil T. Anderson called Restored, Experience Life with Jesus. This course would be great for any new Christian. It starts with the prayers renouncing the occult and everything related, as many of us have done as new Christians. It walks you through overcoming false guidance and deception. It makes you look at labels and character traits formed by people that had influence in your life. Traits that we have adopted because of our perception of the way the world sees us. Some have been instilled in us by experiences and what we had to do to navigate them. There are so many reasons the world gives us to live as the constantly changing world wants us to. Restored provides a roadmap to address these issues, encouraging you to confront as many of these traits as you can, the emotions felt, lessons learned, how they affect your personality, and how they affect your relationship with God. Breaking bonds that separate us from Him, rebellion, pride, generational sin. It teaches how Jesus is always looking through a lens of love, and we should also. It shows you that we are God's children, and how He sees us is the way He wants us to see ourselves and others. How He sees us is how He wants us to live our lives so that we remain close to Him and carry out His work. I think I have changed a bit since the class. When I feel irritation or anger coming on, I try and look at the cause and what I have done to give a demon the inroad to torment me. I quickly try to pray and ask God how He sees my role in this situation. It's a process, and I still come across thoughts or memories that bring up bad feelings, but I can't stress enough how important it is to confront these, confront and renounce those things. Every one of them is an inroad that builds on the next, compounding or allowing new things to be mad at. I physically feel better too. I didn't realize how heavy anger is until I put it down. So it doesn't go away instantly, but I catch myself all the time, and I catch it early. Things just don't anger me the way they used to, or the small irritations. So that's it. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sarah Kober, not Sarah Brinson. Yeah. I was born in a small town in Iowa, about 60 miles south of the Minnesota border, kind of right in the middle of the state. I have 3 younger brothers and an older half-sister from my dad's previous marriage. My childhood was a pretty typical childhood of the 80s. We would go outside and play and come home when the streetlights came on. Play out in the sand, and yeah, it was great. I went with my parents, who faithfully went to the local Baptist church. Starting in the 3rd grade, I went to the summer church camp every year. I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior really young, probably 6, 7, maybe 8. I don't really even know. It was at Vacation Bible School during the summer. I had a really good relationship with my mom while I was growing up. My dad was authoritarian, and I was a pretty compliant child, but our relationship was not great, especially when I hit puberty. My dad didn't know how to handle me and just kind of took off a hands-off approach, not really talking to me or having anything to do with me at all. When I was about 14 to 15, he hit a midlife crisis and started doing marijuana with his cousin. His cousin ended up dying while my father was in the room, and it changed him. Life at home got pretty volatile until the day he came home on Valentine's Day, the year that I was turning 16. He decided to beat the Jezebel spirit out of my mother and for not doing pot with him and put her in the hospital for a few days. He ended up going to a psychiatric hospital and was diagnosed bipolar while my mom got a restraining order and proceeded to divorce him. This really affected my life and my brother's lives, and my brothers really did not do well, but God was a huge part of my life, and I think I was old enough that it did do quite the amount of damage to me. I sensed that God was protecting me and guiding my life from a pretty young age. He prevented my mom from aborting me, which was great. She and my dad were not married when I was conceived. In fact, my dad was technically still married to his first wife. So he had to resolve that so he could actually marry my mom. I felt like God taught me a lot of things before I even really learned them from books or other people or anything. Like the process of forgiving my father. He kind of started walking me through that before I even learned how to do that. I, in high school, always thought I was very unattractive because I got no attention from boys at all. Apparently, according to my daughter, she said that that's actually kind of typical for girls that are being protected by the Lord. And I'm like, okay. I had friends that were druggies, and they said that I was a good girl, and they wanted to keep me a good girl, and so they would not let me be around drugs, even though they were my friends. And so I'm like, sweet. During my senior year of high school, many of my friends were going to colleges to check them out before committing to going to them. I didn't feel like I was supposed to go to college, but I had no idea what I was supposed to do. So that's when Heidi's aunt came up to me and told me about the Master's Commission at Zion. I'm like, that's what I'm supposed to do. And she's like, wait. It's in Washington. I'm like, DC? And she's like, no, state. And I'm like, that's fine. She's like, but there's a lot of rules. I'm like, I don't care. And she goes, but it costs this much money. I'm like, if I'm supposed to go, I'm going to go. And God will provide. And there was a family in the church that had left the church, and they couldn't find a home church where they were at. And so they had been saving their tithe at a savings account for about a year and a half. And when they heard about me going into the Master's Commission, they gave it to me and said, this is what God wants us to give it to. And it almost paid my entire tuition. So after I graduated high school, 18 years old, I moved out to Washington State. The farthest west I had ever been was Colorado. And so I moved. Growing up in a Baptist church, which is Calvinist, I had never heard about the gifts of the Spirit or praying in tongues. I had a sense of knowing things. God would tell me things. I don't know if that was actually the prophetic or not, but it was just something that I knew. Within a month or so of being out here, living with Emery and Sue, I got drunk in the Spirit and started praying in tongues. I have never stopped. It's actually my go-to when I'm really stressed out or when I have fear or anxiety. I don't even realize I pray in tongues. There are times I'm actually in my dreams praying in tongues. I'm like, whoa. So my MC class, Master's Commission class, was and still is pretty close. In fact, some of us married each other. Like my husband and his cousin and his wife. I had no idea that Scott liked me in the Master's Commission. He hid it in his heart a little too well. During our ring ceremony, I was told that I would marry a friend of God. A few people later, Scott came up and they said he was a friend of God. I burst out laughing. Nobody else really picked up on it until they're like, oh, I'm like, yeah, that's funny. He's like, it's okay. A year and a half later, this was going through my mind when I was hurt by somebody else and found out that Scott liked me a lot. He was everything I wanted in a husband and father for my children, so I chose to marry him because I knew it was God's will for me. It took a bit for my emotions to kind of catch up. I had a lot of hurt that I needed to work through from my father and another person. So we had quite the start to our marriage. I hurt him. There's a saying, hurt people. And I was devastated that I did that to such an amazing man. And so I prayed that God would give me the love that he wanted for me to have for my husband, because he is an amazing, godly man. God used our marriage to heal me of my wounds and to help us to grow and mature together and to have a strong love for each other. Scott and I had 3 kids in 2001, 2002, and 2003. If you can imagine, that is insane. My oldest was 2 years and 4 months old when my baby came. And then we threw in a puppy when she was 6 months old. I prayed in tongues a lot. I was a stay-at-home mom for them for about 14 years, doing some odd jobs here and there. When our middle child was 3, he was diagnosed with autism. He was nonverbal and had some stimming behavior. Scott and I decided to fast and pray for him and take him to the healing rooms here in town. The first time we took him, the day after, he started talking. His first words were counting to 10. The second time we took him, his stimming behaviors, not all of them, but a majority of them stopped. Yeah, the third time I went by myself with him, and they said, this is how God wants him. I'm like, all right, then we're going to just go with it. And he is an awesome kid. I don't know, if anybody knows him, you guys should spend some time with him. He's fun. But we are very, very proud of all 3 of our kids, and we are a very happy family.
Wow, so blessed by all those testimonies. Now I see why nobody ever misses it when I'm not preaching, because the testimonies are so awesome. I know we got a little late, but I wanted to let Jill and Heidi come up and share a bit about just their vision for this place and what God has on their heart, and then we'll have we'll pray for the food. Get on with the barbecue. Would you welcome Mishael and Heidi Larson?
Okay, I'll keep it short and sweet. For sure, we're going a little long, but we're going to have some fun. And I've shared this before, but it's in Matthew 13:40. For the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure found in the field. And the guy, and I'll just paraphrase it, just go quick, but he found it, buried it, went and sold everything he had to get it. And then did that. And so I just looked up the kingdom of heaven. Obviously, kingdom, definition-wise, is his established authority, God's established authority in heaven, where he hangs out and dwells in his perfection. Isn't that cool? The kingdom of heaven is his established authority where he lives in perfection. And so Jesus is telling that parable, which was pretty amazing. And so he's saying, the kingdom of heaven is this, and the story is like this. And so the man saw something very, very valuable and attributed it to the kingdom of heaven. And so this is not heaven, but we would love to think that it's going to be a slice of it, like something on earth that would project that and say, God, we'd love this to be like a kingdom of heaven experience, to where this is a blessing to our church, to our family, to others. And then the prayer here was just about being a blessing, like people getting married and establishing his kingdom here type of thing, where people are getting married and having long marriages where they're married for 50 years and super cool stuff. So that just was a huge blessing. Thank you, Mike. That was it's good stuff. Thank you for prophesying over us. And so we're excited about this. We saw this treasure this time last year, and it didn't look like this. I'll tell you that right now. So just even in 2 months, this is just staggering. Thank you so much, you guys, for coming and helping and doing that. You know, one church workday takes what would take me a month to do by myself. So it's just really cool to see this and watch this. And right over there is going to be a chapel. And I've already had visions of worshiping in there and all that type of stuff too. So we're just super blessed. So thank you.
So I've kind of felt a little bit of sobering or whatever you call it. Like that was very upsetting, what happened to Tom and stuff getting hurt on our property and also just kind of being aware once it's starting to get a little bit beautiful, just like, oh, I really want this place to be a place where God is glorified, that we don't give in to like the greed of just making money, or whatever can come upon this. So I'm just gonna make kind of some, well, not kind of. I'm gonna make some declarations, just that this will not be a place where hidden things happen, where people come to sin, to do bad things. This will be a place that where God's light shines in the dark places, and this won't be a place where evil finds pleasure. This will be a place where people will find pleasure in righteousness and in doing good, and yeah, I kind of just speak that we want our number one focus. I feel like really like oddly humble. I know that sounds so lame, but just like, oh dear, I want to be really careful to fear the Lord, just in honoring God, kind of here. I mean, we're having a church service on our property and it's kind of pretty. It's almost getting pretty. so so I don't know. So I want to say that in partially an accountability way and partially in a way that is like just speaking it loudly with a loudspeaker over our property of this is what it is going to be, that it will be a place of God's Spirit.